The film opens in Miami Beach as Dan Forrester and a number of other soldiers fall from the sky amidst a devastated landscape. Dan lands in a pool alongside other people, who continue falling. The scene moves back to 28 years earlier to December 2022. Dan is a science instructor that lives with his better half Emmy and little girl Muri. At a Christmas celebration, Dan is holding on to hear back about a task at an examination foundation. He gets a call informing him that they have picked another person for the position. As he returns inside to watch the World Cup with his family, the field out of nowhere has some sort of wormhole open up, with a few soldiers from the future emerging before the confounded watchers. A female soldier, Lieutenant Hart, declares to everybody that in 30 years' time from that second, humankind will be cleared off of the essence of the Earth because of an overwhelming alien attack. The expectation is to enlist anyone they can to leap to the future and forestall mankind's termination. A year later, riots and anti-war protests have gone on as the draft has been happening since the initial announcement, and there have been more casualties than anything. Trust for what's in store keeps on waning. Indeed, even Dan's understudies can't focus on their work because they feel that everyone is just going to die anyway. Dan is later called to report for a draft. After undergoing evaluation, he learns that he meets the qualifications because he has already died between the present and the time leading up to the invasion. He has a device placed onto his arm that will aid him in time jumping. It is also revealed that Dan was a squad leader in Iraq 15 years earlier. Given 24 hours to settle his affairs, Dan goes to Emmy's job where she works as a therapist for people who return from the draft. Emmy tells Dan that there is one person who can help get the family to safety, but it is Dan's estranged father James, whom he resents for abandoning him and his mother a long time ago. Dan visits James, who doesn't trust the government and has gone off-grid. Before Dan can ask for help, James says he has never wanted his help, which infuriates Dan because that's the only thing he ever wanted from him, although James says that he would have only made things worse for Dan and his mother. Dan returns home to Emmy and Muri, having to inform them that he has been drafted. The two are heartbroken and hug Dan goodbye. Dan reports to the draft where he meets other people like Charlie, Dorian, Nora and Cowan. The draftees are told about the process of time jumping and the plan for their mission. Charlie lets Dan know that they send individuals who have passed on before the conflict to keep away from an oddity, while likewise noticing that Dorian hopped back subsequent to killing an outsider, which they allude to as white spikes. Without any time to prepare, the draftees are alerted to pass through the jump link into the future where they will end up on Miami Beach. Things go wrong because the draftees are dropped off way higher than the plan was, causing several to fall to their deaths while Dan and others land in the water. After getting out, Dan reports to Romeo Command the Colonel, who informs the team that the military has issued a blanket bombardment on the area to wipe out any living things. She tells the team to rescue lab personnel before the bombs are dropped. The group pushes ahead into the office where they find the lab team dead. However, they recuperate their exploration. Before long, the group encounters the white spikes, who are quick and dangerous with whip-like tails. Dan and his team figure out how to kill some white spikes as they run, yet Cowan falls through a passage, and Dan endeavors to help him. The white spikes are shutting in, so Nora and Cowan stay behind to hold off whatever numbers could be expected under the circumstances. Not long before the tactical drops the bombs on the passage, killing Nora, Cowan, and the white spikes. The surviving draftees wake up at a camp in the Dominican Republic. Dan meets the colonel, who turns out to be an adult Muri. She has some estrangement toward Dan for going through with the draft. She tells Dan that her team has located a female white spike whose physiology may be key in taking down the rest of the hive. She reprimands him and then reveals to him that he died 7 years after the draft in a car accident, and Muri witnessed his final moments. All of this being after he returned from the draft and became disillusioned and left his family, hence her estrangement toward him. The group takes the female back to an oil rig where the jump link is so they can deliver a poison from the female's blood that will clear out all the white spikes. Before long, a lot more aliens overwhelm the base and assault, prompting another savage fight. The time in the jump link is going to lapse and the female white spike breaks free. The female assaults and makes the scaffold break down with Muri on there. In spite of the fact that Dan attempts to save her, she gives up so she and the female can die while Dan and the enduring draftees return to their current year. After returning, Dan attempts frantically to return and endeavor to save Muri, yet it is useless as the jump link is presently disconnected, taking the leap back unthinkable. He has likewise figured out how to clutch the poison, as they couldn't pry it from his hands. Dan gets back. While conversing with Emmy, he tells her that he met Muri as a grown-up and worked with her. Emmy proposes that the outsiders didn't show up in 2048 when the attack started, yet that they might have been there a whole lot sooner. Dan then, at that point, goes to a bar where he sees as Dorian, who lets him know that he has terminal malignant growth. Dan gets some information about a white spike hook that he kept as a keepsake, and they find debris on it that came from Russia. Dan gets some information about data in regards to volcanic debris, prompting every one of them concluding that the white spikes have previously been on Earth this entire time and were defrosted by a worldwide temperature alteration. Dan, Charlie, and Dorian endeavor to find support from an administration higher up to permit them to take set for Russia, however he denies them. Dan then, at that point, goes to James for help, and they, alongside different troopers, come to Russia and find the site of the frozen white spikes. It turns out that the ship they came in on was not theirs, but rather to a different species that was carrying the white spikes as cargo to eliminate other planets. They proceed to inject the toxin into the white spikes, but the aliens wake up and begin to attack. After an intense battle, Dorian sacrifices himself to obliterate the white spikes with a bomb. Unfortunately, the female white spike remains, and she goes after Dan and James. They attempt to inject her with the poison, but she bites her arm off to prevent it from spreading. After beating it further, Dan shoves the toxin into the female's throat and knocks her off a cliff where she splatters, officially ending all the white spikes for good. News about the war's prevention spreads, with the higher-up from earlier taking credit for Dan, and the others making the trip. Dan reunites with Emmy and Muri, and he introduces Muri to James. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notification, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.